Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her friends spent weekends at the mall or talking about boys, Sarah was doing push-ups in her backyard and running 5 miles before sunrise. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscles, it was about never giving up, no matter what life threw at you. At 18, Sarah shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to join the Navy. Her mother cried for days, begging her to reconsider. Her high school boyfriend called her crazy. Even her best friends couldn't understand why she'd want to leave their comfortable small-town life for something so dangerous and demanding. "You're a girl, Sarah," her boyfriend had said with a condescending smile. "Why don't you just go to college like everyone else? Find a nice guy, get married, have kids. That's what normal girls do." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had heard variations of this speech her entire life. Teachers who steered her away from advanced math classes, coaches who put her on the bench despite outperforming the boys, family members who bought her dolls when all she wanted was a football. "Maybe I don't want to be normal," she replied, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. The Navy recruiter, Petty Officer Rodriguez, had been surprised when Sarah walked into his office. Most young women who came to see him were interested in administrative roles or medical positions. But Sarah had something different in her eyes, a fire that reminded him of the best sailors he'd ever served with. "I want to be a SEAL," Sarah had said without hesitation. Rodriguez nearly choked on his coffee. "Ma'am, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but women aren't eligible for SEAL training. There are plenty of other opportunities in the Navy that might interest you." Sarah leaned forward in her chair. "Then I'll be the first." The road to that possibility was long and uncertain. First, Sarah had to prove herself in basic training. Then in her chosen rating as a hospital corpsman. She excelled at everything: physical fitness, medical training, weapons handling, leadership. Her instructors were impressed but cautious. The military was slowly opening more roles to women, but the special operations community remained largely closed. During her first deployment aboard a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, Sarah worked alongside Navy SEALs who were temporarily assigned to the ship. She watched them train, studied their methods, and quietly began incorporating their techniques into her own fitness routine. Late at night, when most of the crew was sleeping, she would practice combat movements in the ship's small gym. Chief Petty Officer Mike Thompson was the first to notice. He was a grizzled SEAL veteran with 20 years of service and enough combat experience to fill several lifetimes. Most sailors gave him a wide berth. His reputation for being tough was legendary throughout the fleet. "You're not bad, Martinez," he said one night after watching her practice close-quarters combat moves. "But you're missing something." Sarah stopped mid-motion, sweat dripping from her forehead. "What's that, Chief?" "The why," Thompson replied. "Technique is important, but it won't save you when everything goes wrong. You need to know why you're willing to die for the person next to you." Over the following months, Thompson became an unlikely mentor. He taught Sarah advanced combat techniques, shared stories from his deployments, and helped her understand the mental toughness required for special operations. He also warned her about the challenges she would face as a woman trying to break into an all-male community. "They're going to test you in ways that have nothing to do with your abilities," he said one evening as they watched the sunset from the ship's deck. "Some will try to break you because they don't think you belong. Others will try to protect you because they think you're weak. Both responses are wrong and both are dangerous." Sarah absorbed every lesson, every piece of advice. She pushed herself harder than ever before, knowing that when her opportunity finally came, she would have to be better than good. She would have to be exceptional. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Military policy was evolving rapidly, and a pilot program was being developed to assess women for special operations roles. Sarah was one of only 12 women selected from across all branches of the military to participate in the evaluation. The night before she left for the assessment, her phone rang. It was her mother calling from their small Texas home. "Sweetheart, I know I haven't always understood your choices," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've always been braver than the rest of us." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "Thanks, Mom. That means everything to me." "Just promise me one thing," her mother continued. "Promise me you'll come home." Sarah looked out at the ocean, vast and dark under the starlit sky. She thought about all the challenges ahead, all the people who still believed she didn't belong, all the obstacles that remained in her path. I promise. Mom, a Martinez never quits. The assessment location was classified somewhere in the mountains of Colorado. Sarah arrived with her single duffel bag, just like the 11 other women who had been selected. They came from different backgrounds, Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, but they all shared the same determined look in their eyes. The first week was designed to break them physically. Endless runs through mountain terrain, obstacle courses that seemed impossible, swimming in freezing lakes and carrying heavy packs for miles without rest. 3 women quit by day 5. The second week focused on mental toughness, sleep deprivation, psychological stress, impossible scenarios with no clear solutions. The instructors pushed them to their breaking points and beyond, looking for any sign of weakness or hesitation. 2 more women were eliminated. By the third week, only 6 remained, including Sarah. The training intensified. Combat scenarios, hostage rescue simulations, survival exercises in harsh conditions. Every day brought new challenges, new tests of their abilities and resolve. Sarah excelled, but she also noticed something troubling. Some of the male instructors seemed to be looking for reasons to eliminate the women rather than reasons to pass them. Comments were made about physical limitations, emotional instability, and the potential disruption to unit cohesion. On the final day of assessment, during a particularly brutal combat simulation, Sarah's partner, another woman named Jessica from the Marines, was injured. The scenario called for them to extract a high-value target while under heavy simulated fire. Jessica twisted her ankle badly during the approach and couldn't continue. "Leave me," Jessica whispered, her face pale with pain. "Complete the mission." Sarah looked at her teammate, then at the objective ahead. She knew the instructors were watching, evaluating every decision. This was the test Thompson had warned her about, not just of her physical abilities, but of her character and priorities. Without hesitation, Sarah hoisted Jessica onto her back and continued toward the objective. She carried her teammate through the remaining obstacles, completed the extraction, and crossed the finish line with both of them intact. Later, as they waited for the final results, Jessica approached Sarah. "Why did you risk everything for me back there?" Sarah smiled, remembering Thompson's words about knowing your why. "Because that's what we do. We don't leave anyone behind." The months following Hell Week pushed Sarah to limits she hadn't known existed. The diving phase of Bud S nearly broke her, not physically but mentally. 50 feet underwater in complete darkness, her breathing apparatus suddenly malfunctioned during a training exercise. For 30 seconds that felt like hours, Sarah had to remain calm while instructors watched to see if she would panic. Every instinct screamed at her to surface, to breathe, to escape the crushing weight of water and fear. Instead, she followed her training, located her backup regulator, and continued the mission. When she finally surfaced, her hands were shaking, but she had passed another test. Jessica wasn't as fortunate. During the same underwater navigation exercise, she suffered what the instructors called pool blackout, a loss of consciousness caused by breath-holding exercises. Though she recovered quickly, the medical evaluation that followed revealed a minor heart irregularity that disqualified her from continuing. "I'm sorry," Jessica said as she packed her gear, tears streaming down her face. "I feel like I'm letting down every woman who comes after us." Sarah hugged her friend tightly. "You didn't let anyone down. You proved women belong here. Now I have to prove we can finish what we started." With Jessica gone, Sarah became the only woman left in Bud S. The attention intensified. Every mistake was scrutinized, every success questioned. Media outlets ran daily stories about her progress, often with headlines that had nothing to do with her abilities as a warrior. The pressure reached a breaking point during the land warfare phase. Sarah's class had been divided into squads for a week-long field exercise in the mountains of California. Her squad included Patterson, a former college football player from Alabama, Chen, a quiet perfectionist from California, Williams, who had nearly quit during Hell Week, Martinez, no relation, a tough kid from Chicago, and Rodriguez, who had returned from medical leave stronger than ever. On the third day of the exercise, during a simulated hostage rescue mission, everything went wrong. Intelligence had been faulty. Enemy positions were different than expected, and their extraction point had been compromised. What should have been a routine training exercise turned into a nightmare scenario designed to test their ability to adapt under extreme pressure. Sarah was serving as squad leader for this mission, another test of her leadership capabilities. As they approached the target building, enemy fire erupted from unexpected positions. Patterson immediately took a round to his chest, a paint round in this training scenario. But it meant he was effectively killed in action. Man down. Rodriguez called out, dragging Patterson to cover behind a concrete barrier. Sarah's mind raced through their options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now missing their strongest team member. The hostages were still inside the building, and their extraction helicopter wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. Every second they waited increased the chances of mission failure. Chen, Williams, establish a base of fire from that position, Sarah ordered, pointing to a small ridge that offered good sightlines to the building. Martinez, you're with me. We're going in through the back entrance. Martinez, this is crazy, Williams protested through their radio system. We should call for backup, wait for extraction. Sarah could hear the doubt in his voice, not just about the tactical situation, but about following orders from someone he still wasn't sure belonged in their unit. This was her moment to prove that her gender had nothing to do with her ability to lead warriors in combat. Negative, she replied firmly. Those hostages die if we wait. We're going in now. The next 15 minutes tested every skill Sarah had learned over the past months, moving through the building with Martinez, communicating through hand signals, clearing rooms with precision and speed. When they finally located the hostages, 2 instructors playing the role of captured civilians, enemy forces had already begun their mock execution. Sarah and Martinez engaged multiple targets simultaneously, using teamwork and aggressive tactics to overwhelm their opponents. When the smoke cleared, both hostages were safe. All enemy forces had been neutralized, and Sarah's squad had completed what the instructors later called a textbook example of adaptive leadership under pressure. But the real test came during the debrief that evening. Instructor Captain James Morrison, a legendary SEAL with multiple combat tours, questioned every decision Sarah had made during the mission. "Why didn't you call for backup, Martinez?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer he wanted to hear. "Sir, the tactical situation required immediate action. Waiting for backup would have resulted in hostage deaths. And you were willing to risk your entire squad based on that assessment?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "Sir, I was willing to accept calculated risk to accomplish the mission and save lives. That's what SEALs do." Morrison nodded slowly. "What about Patterson's injury? Some might say a female leader would be too emotional about casualties to make tough decisions." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew this wasn't really about tactics or leadership. It was about whether she could think like a warrior when everything was on the line. "Sir, Patterson understood the risks when he volunteered for this program, just like all of us. My job as a leader is to accomplish the mission while bringing as many of my people home as possible. Sometimes that means making hard choices. Gender has nothing to do with it." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Morrison smiled, the first time Sarah had ever seen him show any emotion. "Outstanding, Martinez. That's exactly the right answer." As Buds neared its end, Sarah realized she had changed in ways she hadn't expected. The physical transformation was obvious. She was stronger, faster, and tougher than she had ever imagined possible. But the mental change was even more profound. She had learned to function at the highest level while exhausted, stressed, and pushed beyond normal human limits. More importantly, she had earned the respect of her instructors and classmates. They no longer saw her as a woman trying to be a SEAL. They saw her as a SEAL who happened to be a woman. The distinction mattered more than most people could understand. The graduation ceremony was held on a sunny Friday morning in Coronado. Out of the 147 candidates who had started Bud S, only 37 remained. Sarah stood in formation with her classmates, wearing the same uniform, having met the same standards, having endured the same challenges. When her name was called to receive her certificate, the applause was thunderous, not just from family members in attendance, but from her fellow graduates. These men, who had initially doubted whether she belonged among them, now stood and cheered for their teammate and sister-in-arms. Chief Williams, her old Hell Week teammate, was the first to congratulate her after the ceremony. "I owe you an apology," he said, extending his hand. "Back during Hell Week, I thought about quitting. You're the reason I didn't. You're the reason any of us made it through." Sarah shook his hand, remembering that terrible night when their boat crew leader had collapsed and everything seemed impossible. "We all made it through together," she replied. "That's what teammates do." But even as Sarah celebrated this historic achievement, she knew the real test was just beginning. Buddis had only prepared her to become a SEAL. Now she had to prove she could operate as one in the real world, where the enemies were real and the stakes were life and death. Her first assignment was to SEAL Team 3, based in Coronado, but deploying regularly to combat zones around the world. The team leader, Commander David Richardson, was a veteran of multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He had specifically requested Sarah for his unit, seeing her graduation from Buddis as proof that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. "Welcome to Team 3, Martinez," he said during their first meeting. "I hope you're ready to get to work. We deploy to Afghanistan in 6 weeks." Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline and determination. After years of training and preparation, she was finally going to do what she had always dreamed of: serve her country as a Navy SEAL in combat. "Ready when you are, sir," she replied, meaning every word. What she didn't know was that her greatest test wasn't waiting for her in the mountains of Afghanistan or the deserts of Iraq. It was waiting much closer to home, in the form of people who would never accept that she belonged among America's elite warriors, no matter what she had accomplished or proven. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by an official courier to Sarah's apartment near the naval base. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, knowing this single piece of paper would determine the course of her entire future. "Congratulations," it began. "You have been selected to proceed to basic underwater demolition SEAL training." Sarah read the words 3 times before they sank in. She was going to Buddis, the grueling 6-month program that would either make her the first female Navy SEAL or break her trying. Out of the 12 women who had started the assessment, only she and Jessica had made it this far. The celebration was short-lived. Within hours of receiving her acceptance letter, Sarah's phone began ringing with calls from reporters, military officials, and even politicians. Word had leaked that 2 women had been accepted into SEAL training, and suddenly Sarah found herself at the center of a national controversy. "This is a publicity stunt," declared one retired admiral during a televised interview. "The standards will have to be lowered, and that puts everyone at risk." "It's about time," countered a female senator. "Our military should reflect the capabilities of all Americans, regardless of gender." Sarah watched the debates with growing frustration. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about her abilities except the people who actually knew her. The media portrayed her as either a feminist pioneer or a dangerous experiment, but none of them bothered to ask about her qualifications, her years of preparation, or her commitment to serving her country. The pressure intensified when she arrived at Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado in California, for the start of Buddis. Protesters gathered outside the gates, some supporting her, others demanding that women be kept out of combat roles. News vans lined the streets, and photographers with long lenses tried to capture her every move. Her first day was a nightmare. As she walked through the compound to check in, groups of male sailors stopped their conversations to stare. Some offered encouraging nods, but others made no effort to hide their disapproval. She overheard whispered comments about political correctness, lowered standards, and social experiments. The worst part was the doubt she saw in the eyes of some instructors. These were men she needed to respect her, to push her to her limits, to prepare her for the impossible challenges ahead. Instead, some looked at her like she was a problem to be managed rather than a warrior to be forged. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams was different. He was a 25-year veteran with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless during training. He had broken more aspiring SEALs than almost anyone else in the program's history. "I don't care what's between your legs," he announced to the entire class on the first day. "I care what's between your ears and what's in your heart. Some of you think this is going to be easier because there are women in the class. Some of you think it's going to be harder. You're all wrong. It's going to be exactly what it's always been. The hardest thing you've ever done in your life." The class started with 147 candidates. By the end of the first week, 12 had quit. Sarah and Jessica were still there, but the pressure was immense. Every mistake was magnified, every success questioned. When Sarah struggled with a particularly challenging swim, instructors wondered if she wasn't strong enough. When she excelled at a combat exercise, they suggested the standards might have been adjusted. The famous Hell Week began during their 4th week of training. For 5.5 days, candidates would get fewer than 4 hours of sleep while enduring constant physical and mental challenges. It was designed to push human beings beyond their breaking point, to find out who would quit when everything seemed impossible. Sarah had prepared for this moment her entire adult life. She had studied accounts of previous Hell Weeks, trained her body and mind for sleep deprivation, and steeled herself for the inevitable moment when her body would beg her to quit. The first day was brutal but manageable. Endless runs on the beach, boat races in freezing surf, obstacle courses that seemed to stretch forever. Sarah's team, 6 men and herself, worked well together despite some initial awkwardness about having a woman in their group. By the second day, the lack of sleep was becoming a serious factor. Candidates began hallucinating, making dangerous mistakes and arguing with each other over trivial matters. 3 men from other teams rang the bell that signified they were quitting. Sarah watched them walk away, wondering if she had the strength to continue. The third day brought new horrors. Ice-cold surf torture, where candidates had to sit in the freezing ocean until their body temperatures dropped to dangerous levels. Sarah's lips turned blue. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably and her muscles cramped painfully. The instructors seemed to keep her team in the water longer than the others, testing whether she would be the first to break. "I can't feel my fingers," whispered Johnson, one of her teammates, as they huddled together for warmth. "None of us can," Sarah replied through chattering teeth. "But we're still here." On the 4th day, disaster struck. During a boat race along the beach, Sarah's team was in 3rd place when Rodriguez, their boat crew leader, collapsed from exhaustion. He hit the sand hard and didn't get up, his eyes rolling back in his head. "Man down," Sarah shouted, immediately dropping her paddle and running to Rodriguez's side. The instructors were there in seconds, checking his vital signs and calling for medical support. As the medics worked on Rodriguez, the rest of the team stood around uncertainly. Their leader was gone, and Hell Week wasn't stopping for anyone. "Martinez," Chief Williams barked. "Your team needs a new boat crew leader." "You want it?" Sarah looked at her 5 remaining teammates. They were exhausted, demoralized, and now missing their strongest member. Taking leadership meant accepting responsibility not just for her own success or failure, but for theirs as well. "Absolutely, Chief," she replied without hesitation. The next 18 hours tested every leadership skill Sarah had ever developed. Her team was falling apart. Johnson was developing hypothermia symptoms, Parker had injured his shoulder, and Williams was talking about quitting every few minutes. As boat crew leader, Sarah had to make tactical decisions, motivate her teammates, and still perform at the highest level herself. During the log PT exercise, where teams had to carry a massive telephone pole through various movements, Sarah's team was clearly struggling. They were smaller than most teams now, with only 6 members, and the weight was distributed unevenly. "We can't do this," Williams gasped during a brief rest period. "We're too small, too tired." "Maybe it's time to be realistic." Sarah looked at her teammate, seeing the defeat in his eyes. This was the moment she had trained for her entire life. Not just the physical challenge, but the leadership test that separated true warriors from everyone else. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through their exhaustion. "Every person here volunteered for this. Not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Rodriguez believed in us. Chief Williams believes in us. I believe in us. The only question is whether you believe in yourselves." She stood up, grabbing her end of the log. "I'm not quitting. I'm not ringing that bell. If you want to leave, that's your choice. But I'm finishing this with or without you." One by one, her teammates stood up and grabbed the log. They completed the exercise, finished the boat race, and made it through the final hours of Hell Week. When the instructors finally called an end to the ordeal, 47 candidates remained out of the original 147. Sarah was one of them, and so was Jessica. But more importantly, her entire boat crew had survived. 5 men who had been ready to quit had found the strength to continue because of her leadership. Chief Williams approached her as she sat on the beach, too exhausted to move. "Not bad, Martinez," he said, the closest thing to praise she had ever heard from him. Rodriguez would be proud. As Sarah watched the sunrise over the Pacific Ocean, she realized something had changed. The other candidates were no longer looking at her as an outsider or an experiment. She had earned their respect the same way every SEAL before her had earned it, by refusing to quit when everything seemed impossible. But Hell Week was just the beginning. The hardest challenges still lay ahead. The mountains of Afghanistan looked different than Sarah had imagined during all those years of training. Harsher, more unforgiving, with shadows that seemed to hide danger around every rocky outcrop. She had been in country for 3 months now, and SEAL Team 3 had completed 12 successful missions without losing a single team member. Sarah had proven herself repeatedly during those missions. She was an expert marksman, a skilled medic, and a natural at the kind of quick thinking that kept teams alive in hostile territory. Her teammates had long since stopped treating her differently because of her gender. In combat, the only thing that mattered was competence. "Martinez, you're on overwatch for this one," Commander Richardson briefed during their pre-mission planning. They were preparing for a night raid on a compound suspected of harboring a high-value target, an insurgent leader responsible for coordinating attacks against American forces. Sarah nodded, checking her rifle scope for the 100th time. As the team's designated marksman for this mission, she would position herself on a nearby ridge to provide covering fire and watch for threats the assault team might miss. The mission began at 0200 hours under a moonless sky. Sarah moved silently through the rocky terrain, her night vision equipment turning the darkness into a green-tinted world of shadows and heat signatures. She reached her overwatch position 30 minutes before the assault team would begin their approach, giving her time to study the target compound through her scope. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Sarah had learned to trust her instincts during her months in Afghanistan, and something felt wrong about this mission. The compound was quiet, with no guards visible and no signs of the normal activity they would expect from an insurgent safe house. "Overlook to base. I have eyes on target," she whispered into her radio. "Something's not right. No movement, no security. Feels like a trap." "Copy that, Overlook," Richardson's voice crackled back. "Maintain position and stay sharp." The assault team moved in precisely at 0230, using practice tactics to breach the compound walls and clear the buildings room by room. Sarah watched through her scope, finger resting lightly on her trigger, ready to engage any threats that might emerge. That's when she saw them. Heat signatures moving through the rocks about 200 yards to the east of the compound. At least 6 fighters with weapons positioning themselves for an ambush on the assault team's planned extraction route. "Base, this is Overlook," Sarah whispered urgently. 6 military-age males with weapons moving to your extraction point. "They're setting up an ambush. Can you engage?" Richardson asked. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculating distance, wind speed, and the complex ballistics involved in precision shooting at night. The targets were moving through terrain that offered limited clear shots, and they were dangerously close to civilian buildings. "Negative on clean shots from this position," she replied. "Too much risk of collateral damage, but I can move to a better position and take them out before you extract." "Negative, Overlook. Too dangerous to move alone. We'll find another extraction route." But Sarah was already studying the terrain between her position and the spot where she could get clear shots at the ambush team. It would require moving through open ground under potential enemy observation. Exactly the kind of high-risk maneuver that could get someone killed. She was also aware that this decision would be scrutinized differently because of her gender. If a male SEAL made this call and succeeded, he would be praised for aggressive tactics and initiative. If he failed, it would be called a calculated risk that didn't pay off. But if Sarah failed, some people would say it proved women were too emotional or reckless for special operations. None of that mattered. Her teammates were in danger, and she was the only one in position to help them. "Base, I'm moving to secondary position," she announced, already beginning to move. "Martinez," I said. "Negative." Richardson's voice was sharp with command authority. "Sir, with respect, they're going to get slaughtered if someone doesn't take out that ambush team. I'm the only one who can do it." Sarah moved quickly but carefully through the rocky terrain, using every piece of cover available while closing the distance to her new shooting position. Behind her, she could hear Richardson continuing to argue over the radio, but she had switched to receive-only mode to avoid the distraction. It took her 8 minutes to reach the position she had identified, a small cluster of boulders that would give her clear lines of sight to all 6 enemy fighters. As she settled into her shooting position, Sarah could see the assault team beginning to move toward their planned extraction point, unaware of the trap waiting for them. She had to make 6 shots in rapid succession, at night, at targets who were spread across nearly 100 yards of terrain. Miss even one, and the survivor could alert other enemy forces or escape to fight another day. More importantly, any return fire could compromise her position and put the entire team at risk. Sarah controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate slow to its combat rhythm, and acquired her first target through the scope. An insurgent fighter crouched behind a rock wall, AK-47 in his hands, waiting for American soldiers to walk into his kill zone. The shot was perfect, a clean hit to the center of mass that dropped the target instantly. Sarah immediately shifted to her second target, another fighter positioned about 30 yards to the left. Another shot, another clean kill. The third target heard something and started to turn toward Sarah's position just as she fired. The bullet caught him in the chest as he moved, spinning him around before he collapsed. 3 down, 3 to go. The fourth and fifth targets were closer together, which meant Sarah had to be even faster with her follow-up shot. She dropped the fourth fighter with a shot to the head, then immediately shifted to the fifth target, who was now looking around frantically, trying to understand where the shots were coming from. Sarah's fifth shot took him down just as he spotted her muzzle flash. That left one enemy fighter, the leader of the ambush team, who was now scrambling toward better cover while trying to use his radio to call for help. This was the hardest shot, a moving target at maximum effective range, partially concealed by rocks and vegetation. Sarah led the target slightly, accounting for his movement and the ballistic drop of her bullet over the extended distance. The shot felt perfect as soon as she squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the final enemy fighter stumble and fall, his radio clattering across the rocks. "Base, this is Overlook," Sarah whispered into her radio. 6 targets neutralized. Extraction route is clear." The silence that followed lasted several seconds before Richardson's voice came back, filled with a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Outstanding shooting, Overlook, but we're going to have words about following orders when we get back to base." The extraction went smoothly, with the assault team recovering valuable intelligence from the compound, and all personnel returning safely to their forward operating base. During the debrief, Sarah learned that her initiative had likely saved multiple American lives. Intelligence. Analysts estimated that the ambush team would have been in perfect position to inflict heavy casualties on the extraction, but the controversy was just beginning. Word of Sarah's unauthorized movement and subsequent engagement spread quickly through the special operations community. Some praised her tactical skill and aggressive leadership. Others questioned whether she had been reckless and insubordinate. The debate reached all the way to the Pentagon, where senior officials were already nervous about the political implications of having the first female SEAL in combat operations. A congressional hearing was scheduled to review the incident, with politicians from both parties planning to use Sarah's actions to support their predetermined positions about women in combat. "This is exactly what we were worried about," said one Pentagon official during a classified briefing. "Female operators making emotional decisions that put missions at risk." "She saved lives and completed the mission," countered another. "Isn't that what we train all our special operators to do?" Sarah found herself caught in the middle of a national debate that had very little to do with her actual performance and everything to do with politics. She had joined the Navy to serve her country, not to become a symbol in America's culture wars. The worst part was how the controversy affected her relationship with her teammates. Some continued to support her completely, recognizing that she had made a difficult tactical decision under extreme pressure. Others began to distance themselves, worried that the political attention would hurt their careers or compromise future missions. "I don't know what to think anymore," Williams confided to her one evening after a particularly tense team meeting. "You saved our lives out there, but now half the Pentagon is questioning whether you should even be here." Sarah felt the weight of representing not just herself, but every woman who might want to follow in her footsteps. The pressure was enormous, and for the first time since joining the military, she began to wonder if she had made a mistake. That doubt would prove to be dangerous in ways she couldn't imagine. Because in Afghanistan, hesitation could be the difference between life and death. And Sarah was about to face her ultimate test in the mountains where America's enemies were waiting. The mission that would change everything began with faulty intelligence and ended with Sarah fighting for her life in a cave system that wasn't supposed to exist. It was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission. Observe and report on suspected enemy activity in a remote valley near the Pakistani border. No direct engagement expected. Minimal risk to personnel. SEAL Team 3 inserted by helicopter at dawn, rappelling into the valley under cover of morning fog. Sarah was point man for the patrol, leading Chen, Rodriguez, and Patterson through terrain that looked peaceful but felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. After months of combat operations, she had developed an instinct for danger that rarely failed her. Movement. 2 o'clock. Chen whispered through their radio net as they crested a small ridge overlooking the target valley. Sarah adjusted her scope and studied the area Chen had indicated. What she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't the small insurgent cell they had been briefed to expect. At least 30 fighters were moving through the valley, armed with heavy weapons and coordinating their movements with military precision. Base. This is Team 3, Sarah whispered into her radio. We have a problem. Intelligence was wrong. This isn't a small cell. We're looking at a major enemy. Concentration. The radio crackled with static before Commander Richardson's voice came through from their tactical operations center 20 miles away. Copy that, Team 3. Can you get better eyes on the situation? Sarah studied the terrain ahead. To get the intelligence Richardson needed, they would have to move closer to the enemy positions. Much closer. It was exactly the kind of high-risk mission that had made her question her own judgment after the political controversy following her unauthorized engagement weeks earlier. We can get closer, Sarah replied, but if we're compromised, extraction is going to be difficult. Your call, Martinez. You're my eyes and ears out there. The weight of command responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. Richardson was trusting her tactical judgment, despite all the questions that had been raised about her decision-making. She couldn't let doubt cloud her thinking now. We're moving in, she decided. Jen, you're with me. Rodriguez and Patterson establish overwatch from this position. For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Chen moved through the valley like ghosts, gathering intelligence on enemy positions, weapons caches, and communication equipment. What they discovered was terrifying. This wasn't just a random insurgent gathering. It was a major staging area for a coordinated attack on American forces throughout the region. They were photographing the final weapons cache when everything went wrong. A young Afghan boy, probably a goat herder, stumbled across their position while chasing an animal that had wandered away from his flock. He took one look at the 2 American soldiers and started screaming. Within seconds, the entire valley erupted with enemy activity. Shouts echoed off the rocky walls as insurgent fighters began searching for the American intruders. Sarah and Chen had perhaps minutes before they would be surrounded and overwhelmed. Rodriguez and Patterson were compromised. Sarah whispered urgently into her radio. We need immediate extraction. Working on it, Rodriguez replied. But you've got fighters moving toward your position from 3 directions. Sarah studied their tactical situation through her scope. They were trapped in a small depression surrounded by rocky hills that offered excellent cover for attacking forces. The nearest helicopter landing zone was over a mile away through terrain that was now crawling with enemy fighters. Chen, we're going to have to fight our way out, she said, checking her ammunition count. You ready for this? Chen's face was pale but determined. Let's do it. The running battle that followed would be analyzed and debated by military tacticians for years to come. Sarah led Chen through a series of fighting withdrawals, using terrain and superior marksmanship to outmaneuver forces that outnumbered them more than 10 to 1. They moved from position to position, engaging enemy fighters when necessary, but always focused on reaching the extraction point. Sarah's training took over completely. She was no longer thinking about politics or controversy, or proving herself as a female SEAL. She was simply a warrior fighting to bring her teammate home. Alive, the first major engagement came at a rocky outcrop about halfway to the landing zone. At least 8 insurgent fighters had positioned themselves to block the Americans' escape route. Sarah studied their positions through her scope, calculating angles and distances while enemy bullets cracked overhead. Chen, when I start shooting, you move to that cluster of boulders on the left, Sarah ordered. I'll cover you, then you cover me. There are too many of them, Chen protested. We should call for air support. No time, Sarah replied, already acquiring her first target. Air support is 20 minutes out. We'll be dead by then if we stay here. Sarah's first shot dropped an enemy fighter who had been trying to flank their position. Her second and third shots forced the other insurgents to take cover, giving Chen the opportunity to move to better ground. The firefight continued for 10 minutes before Sarah and Chen managed to break contact and continue toward the extraction point. But their troubles were far from over. As they moved through a narrow canyon that offered the only practical route to the landing zone, Sarah realized they were walking into a trap. Enemy fighters had used their superior knowledge of the terrain to get ahead of the Americans and set up an ambush in the perfect location. "Chen, stop," Sarah whispered, grabbing her teammate's arm. "Look at that canyon. See how it narrows ahead? Perfect place for an ambush." Chen studied the terrain and nodded grimly. "So what do? Go around? That'll add hours to our movement, and we don't have that kind of time." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical problem. Then she made a decision that would have consequences far beyond anything she could imagine. "You're going around," she said. "I'm going through." "What? That's insane. You'll be walking into a kill zone." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "They're expecting both of us to come through together or to avoid the canyon entirely. They're not expecting one person to come straight at them while the other flanks around behind." Chen understood immediately. It was a classic special operations tactic. Fix the enemy's attention with a frontal assault, while another element attacked from an unexpected direction. But it was also incredibly dangerous for whoever drew the enemy's fire. "I should be the one going through the canyon," Chen argued. "You're the better shot for the flanking maneuver." Sarah shook her head. "I'm the team leader. This is my call." What followed was 20 minutes of the most intense combat Sarah had ever experienced. She approached the canyon methodically, using every piece of cover available while drawing fire from the insurgent positions. Her goal wasn't to win a firefight against superior numbers. It was to keep the enemy focused on her while Chen moved into position behind them. Bullets ricocheted off rocks inches from her head. RPG rounds exploded close enough to shower her with debris, but Sarah kept moving, kept shooting, kept drawing the enemy's attention exactly where she needed it. When Chen finally attacked the insurgent positions from behind, the battle was over in minutes. Caught between two fires and unable to coordinate their defense, the enemy fighters were quickly overwhelmed. "Extraction point is clear," Chen reported as Sarah joined him after the firefight. "But you're bleeding." Sarah looked down at her left arm, noticing for the first time that shrapnel from an RPG explosion had torn through her uniform and opened several deep cuts. She had been so focused on the tactical situation that she hadn't even felt the wounds. "I'm fine," she said, applying field dressings to the cuts. "Let's get out of here before more of them show up." The helicopter extraction went smoothly, but during the flight back to base, Sarah began to feel the full impact of what had happened. She and Chen had survived against overwhelming odds, gathered crucial intelligence, and escaped without losing a single American life. By any objective measure, the mission had been a complete success. But Sarah knew that once again her actions would be scrutinized differently because of her gender. Some would praise her tactical leadership and aggressive decision-making. Others would question whether she had been reckless in exposing herself to unnecessary danger. What she didn't know was that enemy forces had been monitoring American radio communications during the firefight. They knew that the team leader who had outmaneuvered them was a woman, the first female American SEAL they had encountered. And they were planning to use that information in ways that would put Sarah in more danger than she had ever faced before. The war was about to become very personal. The propaganda video appeared on terrorist websites 3 days after Sarah's canyon firefight. The image quality was poor, clearly filmed with a handheld camera in low-light conditions, but the message was unmistakably clear. A masked insurgent leader held up a photograph of Sarah in her military uniform, a picture that could only have come from classified military databases. "The Americans send women to fight their wars." "Now," the man said in accented English, "this female soldier thinks she can defeat the warriors of Allah in our own mountains. We will show her and all American women what happens to those who dare to challenge us." Intelligence analysts estimated the video had been viewed over 2 million times within 24 hours of being posted. Worse, it had been accompanied by detailed information about Sarah's identity, her unit designation, and even her hometown in Texas. Someone with access to highly classified information had sold her out to America's enemies. "They've put a price on your head, Martinez," Commander Richardson told her during an emergency briefing at their forward operating base. $2 million for you alive, 1 million dead. Every insurgent group in Afghanistan and Pakistan is going to be looking for you. Sarah studied the intelligence report spread across the table in front of her. Enemy communications intercepts showed a dramatic increase in chatter about the American woman warrior, and plans to capture or kill her. Several insurgent cells had already begun moving toward areas where SEAL Team 3 was known to operate. "Sir, I think I should be pulled from operations," Sarah said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "I've become a liability to the team." Richardson looked at her sharply. "Is that what you really think?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with emotions she had kept buried for months. The political pressure, the media attention, the constant scrutiny of every decision she made. It had all taken a toll that she was only now beginning to acknowledge. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I don't belong here." "Bullshit," Richardson said, his voice cutting through her self-doubt like a blade. 3 days ago, you and Chen took on a force 10 times your size and won. You gathered intelligence that prevented a major attack on American forces. You brought your teammate home alive. That's not politics or social experiments. That's just good soldiering." Before Sarah could respond, the base alarm began sounding. Emergency calls echoed through the compound as soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Through the windows of the briefing room, Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the distance and hear the distinctive sound of incoming mortar rounds. "They're attacking the base," Richardson said, grabbing his rifle. "This isn't a coincidence. They're here for you." The attack on forward operating base Chapman was unlike anything American forces had experienced in Afghanistan. Instead of the hit-and-run tactics typically used by insurgent forces, this was a coordinated assault by over 200 fighters from multiple terrorist organizations. They had temporarily put aside their differences to pursue the bounty on Sarah's head. Sarah found herself assigned to the base's northern perimeter, where the heaviest fighting was taking place. Enemy forces had broken through the outer defensive wire and were advancing through a series of abandoned buildings that offered excellent cover for their approach. "Martinez, I need you on that rooftop," called Sergeant Major James Thompson, the base's senior enlisted advisor. "You can cover the approach routes from there." Sarah climbed to the roof of a 2-story concrete building that gave her clear sight lines across the battlefield. Through her scope, she could see enemy fighters moving through the ruins, coordinating their advance with hand signals and radio communications. This wasn't a random collection of insurgents. These were experienced fighters who knew what they were doing. The battle raged for 4 hours, with American forces barely holding their defensive positions against overwhelming numbers. Sarah's position on the rooftop made her a priority target for enemy snipers, but it also allowed her to provide crucial fire support for defenders who were running low on ammunition. She had already taken out 6 enemy fighters when she spotted something that made her blood run cold. A group of insurgents was setting up a mortar position behind a low wall, positioned perfectly to rain explosive rounds down on the base's medical facility. If those mortars opened fire, the wounded Americans being treated there would be sitting ducks. The mortar position was over 400 yards away, at the absolute limit of Sarah's effective range with her current weapon. Worse, the enemy fighters were partially concealed behind concrete barriers that left only small target areas exposed. She would have to make several perfect shots in rapid succession to neutralize the threat. Sarah controlled her breathing and acquired her first target, the insurgent loading rounds into the mortar tube. The shot was perfect, dropping him instantly. She immediately shifted to the second target, the fighter adjusting the mortar's aim. Another clean hit. But as she lined up her third shot, return fire began impacting around her position. Enemy snipers had located her rooftop and were trying to pin her down while their mortar team completed their setup. Sarah had to choose between taking cover to protect herself or continuing to engage the mortar position. She chose to keep shooting. Her third shot took out the mortar team leader just as he was preparing to fire the first round. Her fourth shot destroyed the mortar's firing mechanism, rendering the weapon useless. But the concentrated enemy fire was becoming too intense to ignore. An RPG round impacted just below Sarah's position, showering her with concrete debris and temporarily deafening her. When her hearing cleared, she could hear Sergeant Major Thompson shouting over the radio. "Martinez, get down from there. They're bringing up everything they have to take out your position." Sarah looked around the rooftop, realizing for the first time how exposed she had become. Bullet holes pockmarked the concrete around her, and smoke was rising from several small fires started by incoming rounds. The enemy had correctly identified her as a high-value target and was concentrating their efforts on eliminating her. But she could also see that American reinforcements were finally arriving. Helicopter gunships appeared on the horizon, and additional ground forces were beginning to arrive from neighboring bases. The enemy attack was starting to lose momentum as they found themselves caught between the base defenders and the newly arrived reinforcements. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Instead of retreating to safety, she remained in position to provide covering fire for the final push that would break the enemy assault. For the next 30 minutes, she continued engaging targets despite concentrated return fire that grew more accurate with each passing minute. When the battle finally ended, Sarah climbed down from the rooftop to find Sergeant Major Thompson waiting for her with a mixture of admiration and exasperation on his face. "Martinez, that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest," he said. "You stayed up there when any sane person would have taken cover." Sarah looked back at the rooftop where she had spent the last 4 hours, noting the dozens of bullet impacts and scorch marks from explosive rounds. She had come closer to death than ever before. But she had also saved the lives of wounded Americans in the medical facility. "Sergeant Major, I stopped being sane the day I decided to become a SEAL," she replied. The victory at Forward Operating Base Chapman marked a turning point in Sarah's deployment. The successful defense against overwhelming odds had been captured by combat photographers and filmed by embedded journalists. Within days, the images of Sarah on the rooftop, calmly engaging enemy targets while under intense fire, had spread around the world. But the enemy's focus on her had also accomplished something unintended. By making Sarah such a high-priority target, they had revealed their own positions, communication networks, and operational methods. Intelligence analysts were able to use information gathered during the battle to launch a series of counterattacks that decimated insurgent forces throughout the region. More importantly, Sarah's performance under extreme pressure had finally silenced most of her critics within the military. It was impossible to question the courage or competence of someone who had literally stood her ground against hundreds of enemy fighters while protecting wounded American soldiers. "You've proven your point, Martinez," Richardson told her during their final briefing before returning to the United States. "No one is ever going to question whether you belong here again." But Sarah knew that her greatest challenge was still ahead. She was returning home to a country that remained deeply divided about women in combat roles, and her high-profile deployment had made her a symbol whether she wanted to be or not. What she didn't know was that some people back home had already decided she was too dangerous to be allowed to continue serving, and they were prepared to go to extreme lengths to stop her. The ambush came on a quiet Tuesday evening as Sarah drove home from the base to her apartment in Coronado. She had been back from Afghanistan for 6 weeks, adjusting to the strange reality of being treated as both a hero and a controversial figure. The media attention had been overwhelming: interview requests, book deals, speaking engagements, and political groups wanting to use her story to support their agendas. Sarah had turned down most of the requests, preferring to focus on training and preparing for her next deployment. But that Tuesday evening, as she drove through the darkened streets near the naval base, someone else had made plans for her future. The black SUV ran the red light at the intersection of Orange Avenue and 5th Street, slamming into the driver's side of Sarah's car with enough force to flip it completely over. Sarah's last conscious memory was the sound of breaking glass and the sight of her own blood on the steering wheel. When she woke up 3 days later in the intensive care unit at Balboa Naval Medical Center, her body was a catalog of injuries that should have been fatal. Severe head trauma, internal bleeding, multiple broken bones, and burns from the fire that had consumed her vehicle after the crash. The doctors told her she was lucky to be alive. The other driver didn't survive. Detective Maria Santos from the San Diego Police Department told Sarah during her first interview. Blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. "Looks like a tragic accident." But Sarah knew it wasn't an accident. She had noticed the black SUV following her for several blocks before the intersection, had seen it accelerate just before impact, had caught a glimpse of the driver's face in the moment before collision. A face that was cold, calculating, and completely sober. "Detective, someone tried to kill me," Sarah said, her voice still weak from her injuries. "This wasn't a drunk driving accident." Santos looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Martinez, I understand you've been under a lot of stress. Sometimes after severe trauma, patients can develop paranoid thoughts." "I'm not paranoid," Sarah interrupted. "I'm a Navy SEAL. I know the difference between an accident and an attack. The investigation that followed was perfunctory at best. The driver of the SUV had been identified as Marcus Webb, a former Army soldier with a history of alcohol problems and financial difficulties. His blood alcohol level at the time of the crash supported the theory that he had simply been too drunk to see the red light. But Sarah's own investigation, conducted from her hospital bed with the help of sympathetic intelligence analysts, revealed a different story. Webb had received a large cash payment 3 days before the crash, money that had been wired from an account linked to a private security company with ties to defense contractors who opposed women in combat roles. They tried to make it look like an accident. Sarah explained to Commander Richardson during one of his visits to the hospital. But Webb wasn't drunk when he hit me. Someone paid him to try to kill me. Richardson's face darkened as he studied the financial records Sarah had somehow obtained despite being confined to a hospital bed. Even if this is true, proving it is going to be almost impossible. Webb is dead, the money trail is complicated, and the police have already closed the case. Sarah struggled to sit up in her hospital bed, wincing as the movement aggravated her healing injuries. Sir, I can't let this go. If they succeeded in killing me, what message does that send to other women who want to serve in special operations? That if they get too successful, too visible, someone will just eliminate them. What are you planning to do about it? Richardson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I'm going to find out who ordered this hit, Sarah replied, and I'm going to make sure they face justice. What followed was 6 months of the most dangerous investigation Sarah had ever undertaken. Working with a small network of allies within the intelligence community, she traced the money that had paid Webb back through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. The trail led to some of the most powerful figures in America's defense establishment, men who saw Sarah's success as a threat to their vision of military tradition. The conspiracy was broader than Sarah had imagined. It included retired generals who had publicly opposed women in combat, defense contractors who feared that successful female special operators would lead to changes in military culture that might hurt their profits, and politicians who had built their careers on promoting traditional values. But the deeper Sarah dug, the more dangerous her situation became. Her apartment was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen. Her phone calls were monitored, her emails intercepted, her movements tracked by professionals who knew how to stay invisible. She was being hunted by people with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. The breakthrough came when Sarah managed to obtain a recording of a conference call between several of the conspirators, discussing plans to stage another accident that would finish what the car crash had started. The recording was obtained illegally and would never be admissible in court, but it provided the evidence Sarah needed to understand the full scope of the threat against her. They're planning to make it look like a training accident, Sarah told Richardson during a clandestine meeting in a San Diego coffee shop. They have someone inside SEAL Team 3 who's going to sabotage my equipment during a dive exercise. Richardson studied the transcript of the recorded conversation, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This goes all the way to the Pentagon. Some of these names. Sarah, these people can destroy careers, ruin lives, make people disappear completely. Then what do you suggest I do? Sarah asked. Quit? Hide? Let them win? Richardson was quiet for a long moment, staring out the coffee shop window at the busy San Diego street. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a sadness that Sarah had never heard before. I suggest you disappear, he said. Not permanently, but long enough for us to build a case that can't be ignored or covered up. Let them think they succeeded in driving you out. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. You want me to fake my own death? I want you to survive long enough to bring these bastards to justice, Richardson replied. And right now that means making them think they don't have to worry about you anymore. The plan they developed was complex and dangerous. During a training exercise off the coast of California, Sarah would appear to suffer a fatal diving accident. Her body would never be recovered, a common occurrence in deep-water operations that wouldn't raise suspicions. Meanwhile, she would be secretly relocated to a safe house where she could continue gathering evidence against the conspiracy. It has to look completely real, Richardson explained. That means your family, your friends, even most of your SEAL teammates will think you're actually dead. The memorial service, the grief, the investigations, all of it has to be genuine. Sarah thought about her mother back in Texas, about the teammates who had become like brothers to her, about all the people who would mourn her death. The idea of putting them through that pain was almost unbearable, but the alternative was worse. If she stayed visible, kept fighting the conspiracy in the open, she would eventually be killed for real. And her death would send a message to every woman who dreamed of serving in special operations. Step too far out of line. Achieve too much success and you'll be eliminated. The diving accident took place on a gray morning in October, 3 miles off the coast of Coronado. Sarah's teammates watched in apparent horror as she disappeared beneath the waves during what should have been a routine training exercise. Coast Guard rescue teams searched for 3 days before calling off the operation. The memorial service was held at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, with hundreds of SEALs, Navy personnel, and Sarah's family in attendance. Her mother wept openly as the flag that had covered Sarah's empty casket was folded and presented to her. Her SEAL teammates eulogized her as a warrior who had broken barriers and died serving her country. But in a small safe house in the mountains of Colorado, Sarah Martinez was very much alive. And she was planning her return to a world that thought it had finally gotten rid of the woman who had dared to prove that Navy SEALs could come in any form. The people who had tried to kill her were about to learn a fundamental truth about special operations. When you try to eliminate a Navy SEAL, you better make sure the job is finished, because if they survive, they're coming back and they're going to be very angry. Sarah Martinez was dead to the world. But she was about to be reborn as something far more dangerous than her enemies had ever imagined.